There comes a silence so dense it almost hums. A silence not outside of you but within. It doesn't come with thunder or warning but with a soft unraveling. One morning you wake up and something's different. The weight you carry isn't heavier. It's just no longer ignorable. The smile you wear doesn't hurt more, it just stops sticking. You're still functioning, still performing, still moving through your obligations like choreography. But inside something sacred is starting to tremble. Maybe it began after another night of pretending. Maybe it began after the 100th time you swallowed your truth to protect someone else's comfort. Maybe it started the first time you said yes while your body screamed no. You don't know the exact moment the thread snapped, but you know that it did, because now you're no longer able to lie to yourself without bleeding. You've lived your entire life being everything for everyone. You've mastered the art of shape-shifting. You've been the strong one, the dependable one, the kind one, the quiet one. You've bent your boundaries into origami to avoid conflict. You've built relationships on the shaky foundation of emotional self-abandonment. You've called exhaustion a virtue. You've named anxiety ambition. You've mistaken peace for silence. And now your soul is knocking. Not gently, not politely. It is pounding on the door of your chest, demanding to be remembered. This is what Carl Jung meant when he spoke of the self, the original unfractured self that exists beneath the persona. That deeper core of you who never asked to be pleasing, who never agreed to be small, who never consented to the mask. That part of you that knows the difference between safety and suppression. That part of you that has been waiting for you to come home. This isn't burnout. This is a soul quake. A tremor deep in the psyche shaking loose all the lies you had to believe to survive. The lie that your worth depends on others seeing it. The lie that love must be earned. The lie that your needs make you weak. The lie that silence is maturity. Jung wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important." And how long has it been since you were honest, not with others, but with yourself? How long have you filtered your truth through someone else's perception? How long have you edited your soul to fit into spaces never meant to hold it? And now, standing here in the stillness, there's only one question that matters. What would happen if you put yourself first, not theoretically, not later, but now, completely, without apology? Putting yourself above everything else sounds radical, because it is, especially for someone who has been trained since birth to do the opposite, especially for someone whose nervous system has learned that love is conditional, that presence must be earned, that your very existence is too much. You have internalized these lessons so deeply they've become law. And now to put yourself first feels like a betrayal. But to whom, to what? When you choose yourself, you do not betray your people. You betray the system that told you your needs don't matter. You betray the legacy of martyrdom passed down through generations. You betray the silence that kept you small, and in that betrayal, something holy begins. You begin. And yes, your ego will resist. It will scream. It will claw, because it has been trained to equate familiarity with safety. It will tell you that choosing yourself is selfish, that healing is indulgent, that you don't deserve rest until you've proven something, that people will leave, and the truth is they might, but if they do, let them. Because anyone who leaves when you stop abandoning yourself was never loving you. They were loving the version of you who did, and your job is not to keep them. Your job is to return to wholeness. And what does wholeness look like? It doesn't look like perfection. It doesn't look like constant calm or eternal positivity. Wholeness looks like sitting with yourself in your most fragile hour and saying, "I will not abandon you again." It looks like letting the tears come without rushing them away. It looks like allowing anger to speak, not to hurt others, but to hear the parts of you that were never allowed to rage. Wholeness looks like breaking a generational curse simply by saying no more. It looks like not replying to the message that pulls you back into a version of yourself you've outgrown. It looks like spending time alone, not because you're lonely, but because you're finally learning to enjoy your own company. It looks like allowing the discomfort of stillness to exist without numbing it. Because for the first time in your life, you are not escaping yourself. You are meeting yourself. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. You have been acting from unconscious pain for years, choosing people who reflect your unworthiness, chasing dreams that were never yours, attaching yourself to identities designed for survival, not for truth. You weren't broken. You were asleep. And now you are waking. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably. You are remembering that your life was never meant to be a performance, that you were never meant to convince anyone of your worth, that you are not here to fulfill a role, you are here to embody a soul. The soul doesn't compete. It doesn't compare. It doesn't scream for attention. It whispers and it waits, patiently, eternally, until you are ready to listen. And now you are. That's why everything around you feels like it's falling apart. That's why the dreams you once clung to now feel heavy. That's why the relationship you thought was your forever now feels suffocating. That's why the life you built with such pride now feels like a cage. Because it was never built by your soul. It was built by your survival mechanisms. Your ego built a house to protect you, but your soul has outgrown it. And now it wants to fly. Not to escape, but to expand. But before flight comes the fall. Before rebirth comes the breakdown, and this is the part no one prepares you for. The in-between. The space where the old is gone, but the new hasn't yet arrived. The void. Jung called it the night sea journey, a time of descent into the unconscious when the ego dissolves and the true self begins to emerge. It is lonely, it is terrifying, and it is sacred. Because in this space you meet parts of yourself you forgot existed. You meet the little girl who was told her needs were too much. You meet the teenager who learned to smile through pain. You meet the adult who has been holding everything together with trembling hands, and you don't run from them this time. You sit, you listen, you forgive. This is not weakness. This is the most courageous thing you can do. To sit with your darkness without trying to fix it. To let the storm pass through your body without resisting it. To allow grief to come in waves and not demand it explain itself. This is healing, not as a goal, but as a return. Not as an achievement, but as a remembrance. A remembrance that you are not your trauma. You are not your patterns. You are not your mistakes. You are the witness to all of it. And as the witness, you are free. But freedom does not come without cost. The cost is everything that kept you bound. The story that said you had to be small to be safe. The belief that said you had to earn love. The mask that made everyone else comfortable. These will all ask to return. They will seduce you with familiarity. They will promise comfort. But comfort is not the same as peace, and you must choose. Again and again, choose truth over comfort. Choose growth over approval. Choose depth over performance. Choose yourself, especially when it's hard. And it will be hard. There will be days when you miss the numbness. Days when you envy those who still sleepwalk through life. Days when you wonder if the pain is worth it. And on those days, I want you to remember this. You are not crazy. You are awakening. You are breaking centuries of silence. You are unlearning generations of suppression. You are forging a new path in a world that profits from your self-doubt. Of course it hurts. Of course it's heavy. But the weight you're carrying is not just yours, it's ancestral. And in choosing yourself, you're healing not only your life, but the lineage that came before you and the one that will come after. This is legacy. This is leadership. Not in the way the world defines it, but in the way the soul demands it. Not with titles or applause, but with truth, with presence, with integrity. You lead by choosing yourself. You lead by being the first in your family to say, I will not pass this pain on. You lead by doing the inner work no one else was willing to do, and the impact of that immeasurable. Invisible at first, but eternal. This is what it means to walk the path of individuation, to strip away every layer that was never you, to meet your fears not with resistance but with reverence, to say yes to yourself in a world that benefits from your no. It is not easy, but it is holy, and it is yours. Only yours. No one can walk it for you. But I promise you this: when you walk it, truly walk it, you will never feel more alive. Not because life becomes easier, but because you finally belong to yourself. And belonging to yourself changes everything. Not just how you see the world, but how the world responds to you. Because you are no longer seeking permission, you are embodying presence. You are no longer performing worth, you are breathing it. You are no longer negotiating your value based on how others receive you. You are rooted finally in the unshakable knowing that you are allowed to exist fully, loudly, unapologetically. Not because someone else deemed you worthy, but because you remembered. You remembered that before you were shaped by opinions, before you were scarred by expectation, before you were trained to shrink, you were whole. Before they told you to be nice instead of honest, accommodating, instead of authentic, invisible, instead of powerful, you were free. That freedom still lives inside you. It has not died. It has only been buried beneath the noise, the conditioning, the roles, the shame. But now the excavation has begun. Every time you say no to what depletes you, you dig. Every time you name your truth, you uncover more. Every time you rest instead of rush, feel instead of fix, cry instead of cope, you reveal her. The original you, the untamed, unashamed, fully alive self that was never missing, only silenced. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the self as both destination and origin. It's not something you invent, it's something you uncover. And once uncovered, you can never return to who you were pretending to be. But the world around you might try to pull you back. Not because it's evil, but because it's used to your absence. It's used to you disappearing into other people's needs. It's used to you saying yes when you meant no. It's used to your compliance, your caretaking, your silence. And now as you begin to rise, the world may tremble. Some people will feel threatened by your boundaries. Some will call your growth selfish. Some will try to guilt you back into roles you've outgrown. Let them, because their reaction is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is your return to alignment, to truth, to integrity. To the you who no longer sacrifices her own peace to keep the illusion of peace for others. And yes, this is where it gets real. This is where the loneliness can hit like a tidal wave, because growth creates space. Space between you and the person you used to be. Space between you and those who still benefit from your disempowerment. Space between you and the world you built while abandoning yourself. And that space can feel like grief, because it is. Grief for the years you lost betraying yourself. Grief for the love you accepted while starving for real connection. Grief for the silence you mistook as maturity. Grief for all the times you stayed small to make others comfortable. But grief too is sacred. It is the fire that burns away the false so the truth can rise. Let it rise. Let it rise even when it hurts. Let it rise even when the voice in your head says you're too much. Even when the old trauma says you'll be left if you choose yourself. Even when the body shakes with fear at the thought of being alone. Let it rise. Because every time you allow yourself to be fully present with your truth, you rewrite the story. You rewrite what love means. You rewrite what success means. You rewrite what healing means. It's no longer about being palatable. It's no longer about being impressive. It's no longer about being chosen. It's about being whole. And wholeness includes it all: the rage, the tenderness, the mistakes, the miracles. Wholeness means you don't have to earn your place. You already belong. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But privilege doesn't mean ease. It means sacred responsibility. The responsibility to stop performing, to stop hiding, to stop betraying your own soul to be accepted by others who have forgotten theirs. This is the holy rebellion. Not against the world, but for your own becoming. And yes, it will dismantle the life you built in survival, but it will make room for the life you were meant to live. And that life, it's quieter at first, because it's not built on noise, it's built on depth. It's built on long pauses, deep breaths, and honest conversations. It's built on solitude that nourishes, not isolates. It's built on relationships that honor your evolution, not resent it. It's built on creativity that flows from authenticity, not approval. It's built on love that doesn't ask you to shrink. And when you live from this place, you become magnetic. Not because you're trying to attract, but because you're no longer repelling yourself. This is what happens when you put yourself above everything else. You stop reaching outward and start rooting inward. You stop begging life to show up for you, and you start showing up for yourself. You stop trying to force alignment, and you become alignment. And life? Life doesn't ignore that. Life responds. It rises to meet you, not because you proved your worth, but because you finally stopped questioning it. Because you finally remembered you don't get what you want, you get what you are. And what you are changes when you stop betraying yourself. When you begin to live not from the expectations placed upon you, but from the truth that has always lived within you. You start to notice things. The way your body softens around people who see you clearly. The way your energy lifts in spaces where you're not required to explain yourself. The way your creativity flows when you're no longer trying to be good, only real. You begin to experience freedom in moments that used to feel suffocating. The conversation you used to dread becomes a boundary you now hold with grace. The invitation you used to accept out of guilt becomes an empowered no. The mirror you used to fear becomes a reflection you can finally meet with open eyes. But this transformation isn't just about changing behaviors, it's about shedding identities. Because the old you, the one who performed, who pleased, who tolerated, who proved, is dying. And ego death is no small thing. It feels like annihilation. It feels like standing naked in front of the world with nothing to hide behind. It feels like walking through a burning forest and realizing the flames are your own truth, consuming everything that isn't. Jung called this the process of individuation, the death of the false self, and the birth of the true one. Not in theory. In your bones, in your blood, in your nervous system, in your decisions. And every time you choose truth over familiarity, you reinforce that birth. You become more you. And with that becoming comes responsibility. Because now you can no longer pretend. You can no longer stay where your soul is starving. You can no longer tolerate relationships that drain you. You can no longer work jobs that silence you. You can no longer wear masks that suffocate you. You know too much now. You've seen behind the curtain. And even if your mind says go back, your body knows there is no going back. There is only forward, into the unknown, into the terrifying, beautiful, expansive unknown of who you really are. And this is where many people stop, because this is where it gets hard. This is where comfort ends and consciousness begins. You will lose things on this path. You will lose people who only loved the version of you that didn't love yourself. You will lose the illusion of certainty. You will lose the coping mechanisms that once kept you afloat. But you will gain something far greater presence. Aliveness. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the kind that comes from no longer being in conflict with yourself. Not the kind of happiness that comes from constant positivity, but the kind that arises from full-spectrum truth. The kind that says I can hold my rage and still choose compassion. I can grieve and still be grateful. I can be afraid and still move forward. This is emotional adulthood. This is psychological wholeness. This is the return to self. And the self doesn't need to convince anyone. It doesn't need to win arguments or prove its worth or gain followers. It is. That's enough. And when you live from that isness, you attract others who live there too. People who meet you without masks. People who aren't afraid of your depth. People who celebrate your boundaries instead of punishing you for them. People who say, I see you, and mean it. These are soul connections. Rare, sacred. Born not from performance, but from presence. From two whole beings choosing each other without needing each other to fill a void. And in those relationships, romantic or otherwise, you heal in ways no book or therapist ever could. Because nothing is more healing than being fully seen and still loved. But to be fully seen, you must first see yourself. You must turn inward with radical honesty. You must face the parts of you you've judged, silenced, and exiled. The part that still feels unworthy. The part that sabotages good things. The part that fears abandonment so much it would rather leave first. Jung called this shadow work, not because the shadow is evil, but because it is unconscious. And what is unconscious cannot be integrated. It must be brought into the light. And the light is attention. The light is compassion. The light is saying, I will no longer run from you. I will sit with you. I will learn your name. I will offer you presence instead of punishment. This is not glamorous. It is not Instagrammable. It does not fit into a 5-step self-help framework. It is messy. It is raw. It is sacred. It is slow. But it is also the only way to become free. Because as long as you are at war with yourself, you will never feel at home in the world. And the truth is, most of your suffering has never been about what happened to you. It's been about the meaning you made of it. The stories you created, the conclusions you drew, the beliefs you formed, and those beliefs unexamined, unconscious, have shaped your entire life. Beliefs like, I have to be strong to be loved. My needs are a burden. If I speak my truth, I'll be rejected. If I stop performing, I'll be abandoned. These are not facts. These are wounds, and wounds can be healed. But they must be chosen. No one can force your healing. No one can save you. That's the hard truth, but it's also the liberating one, because it means the power is yours. You don't have to wait for an apology. You don't have to wait for closure. You don't have to wait for someone else to validate your experience. You can choose right now to begin, to feel, to remember, to return. And in that choice, something ancient in you awakens. A knowing, a fire, a truth that says, I will no longer betray myself. And from that fire, you rise. And rising doesn't always look like you thought it would. It's not always loud. It's not always triumphant. Sometimes rising looks like resting, like saying no, like turning down an opportunity because it asks you to wear a mask you've already outgrown. Sometimes rising looks like losing followers, losing friends, losing family, because their version of love was built on the version of you that couldn't say no. But you're saying no now. And that no is a sacred yes to your truth, to your boundaries, to your peace. Jung said the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But when you do, when you finally surrender to your own becoming, you realize it's not terrifying, it's liberating. Because there is nothing more powerful than a person who no longer fears being themselves. And when you're no longer afraid of yourself, you stop fearing the world. You stop fearing rejection. You stop fearing loss. Because you've already faced the greatest loss, the loss of your own voice. And now that you've reclaimed it, nothing external holds the same power over you. You begin to walk with a different kind of posture. Not arrogant, not performative. Just sovereign, rooted, whole. You no longer shrink to avoid judgment. You no longer explain yourself to be understood. You no longer overgive to be accepted. You realize that your presence is the gift, your existence is the offering, and the people who are meant for you will not require you to be anything but you. This clarity becomes your compass. You begin to see with new eyes. The relationships you once tolerated now feel suffocating. The conversations you once entertained now feel empty. The environments you once normalized now feel toxic. And you can't unknow what you've come to know. You can't unfeel what you've felt. You can't unsee the misalignment. So you walk away, not out of cruelty, but out of integrity. Because staying would cost you yourself, and you're no longer willing to pay that price. You start to understand that peace is not passive, it is active. It is earned through the courage to face the chaos within and the conviction to not replicate it without. It's knowing when to speak and when to be still, when to hold and when to let go, when to fight and when to walk away. It's living from center, not from wounding, and from that center you create a new world. Not just for yourself, but for everyone you touch. You become a mirror for others, a permission slip, a living example of what it means to choose wholeness over performance. You're not perfect, but you're real. And in a world addicted to illusion, real is revolutionary. And yes, the old stories will try to return. The voices will creep in when you're tired. The habits will whisper when you're uncertain. But you're not who you were, and even if you fall, even if you forget, even if you spiral for a moment, you will come back faster. You will come back deeper. You will come back wiser, because now you have roots. And those roots are not planted in external validation. They are planted in truth, in presence, in self-trust. And from that soil, your life begins to bloom. It's not dramatic. It's not flashy. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it's as subtle as breathing fully for the first time in years, as quiet as choosing to pause instead of react, as gentle as placing your hand on your chest and whispering, "I've got you." These moments may seem small, but they are seismic, because they are the building blocks of a life that feels like home, not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. Truly yours. And when you build a life that feels like home inside yourself, everything outside of you changes. You stop chasing what doesn't feel right. You stop tolerating what drains you. You stop trying to fix people who don't want to change. You realize that your only job is to stay in alignment. And alignment isn't a destination, it's a daily choice. 1,000 micro decisions to stay connected to your center, to not abandon yourself even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient. Because that's the real test, not who you are when everything is easy, but who you are when it's not. When the world is loud, when the past comes knocking, when the pressure builds, can you stay rooted? Can you stay soft? Can you stay true? Can you choose the version of you that doesn't hustle for love? The one that doesn't seek to be chosen because she's already chosen herself. That is the revolution. That is the redefinition of power, not control, not dominance, but self-possession. And that power doesn't require performance. It simply is. Jung knew this. He didn't speak of healing as a destination, but as a return, a descent, a confrontation, a resurrection. Not of a better version of you, but of the truest one. The one who existed before the world told you who to be. And now, you are becoming her. Not by doing more, but by finally doing less. By unlearning, by releasing, by remembering, by sitting in the silence long enough to hear your own voice again. And in that voice you find everything you were searching for in others: love, safety, acceptance, freedom. It was never out there. It was always here, in you. And here you are, at the threshold of everything. Not the finish line, not the end, but the beginning of a life lived in alignment with truth, with soul, with wholeness. A life no longer defined by who you're supposed to be, but shaped by who you truly are. You no longer seek permission. You no longer shrink for safety. You no longer wear masks to be loved. Because you've come home to the one place you were always meant to return to yourself. And in that return, you've uncovered something the world cannot touch. Not reputation, not success, not image. Something deeper, something ancient, something eternal. You've uncovered the self, not the persona you curated, not the ego that protected, not the roles you performed, the self wild-wise whole, the self that existed before the world handed you its script, the self that knows who you are when everything else falls away. Carl Jung called this the individuation process, the integration of all parts of you. The conscious and unconscious, the light and shadow, the known and mysterious. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you to forget. It's about facing every unhealed wound, every buried belief, every disowned part of you and saying, you belong. Even the parts you were taught to hate, even the versions of you that made mistakes, even the broken, confused, raging, ashamed fragments. Especially those. Because those were never the problem. They were the protectors. They were the messengers. They were waiting for you to listen. And now you're listening. And in that listening, something shifts. The nervous system begins to regulate. The mind begins to quiet. The energy begins to flow. Life begins to feel less like something you must control and more like something you can trust. You no longer need to manifest through force. You magnetize through frequency. You no longer beg for love. You become love. You no longer chase purpose. You embody it. Because when you live from alignment, life aligns around you. This doesn't mean life becomes perfect. It means you stop requiring it to be. You stop measuring your worth by outcomes. You stop tying your identity to how others see you. You realize that your peace was never meant to be conditional, that your worth was never meant to be transactional, that your soul was never meant to be negotiated. And from that place, even the hard days don't destroy you. Because you no longer meet them as someone powerless. You meet them as someone whole. Wholeness does not mean invulnerability. It means self-acceptance. It means you can cry and still be strong. It means you can feel fear and still move forward. It means you can fall and still rise without shame. It means your life is no longer a performance. It's a prayer, a presence, a path. One that only you can walk. And now you're walking it not as someone searching for themselves, but as someone returning to themselves. And that return is everything. It's the healing, it's the awakening, it's the liberation, it's the moment you stop asking life, am I enough yet, and start declaring I am. Not because of what you've done, not because of what you've overcome, but because you exist. Because you are. Because your breath is proof that you belong. Let this land in your bones. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not late. You are right on time. You are exactly where your soul needs you to be, even if it hurts, even if it's unclear, even if the path ahead is still hidden. Because this isn't about where you're going. It's about who you are while you walk there. It's about presence. It's about truth. It's about choosing yourself again and again, even when it's hard, even when it's lonely, even when no one claps for it. Especially then. Because the applause you were waiting for was never out there. It was in here, in your own heart, in the way your soul softens when you're honest, in the way your body exhales when you stop pretending, in the way your life expands when you tell the truth. That's the real reward. That's the real becoming. And no one can take that from you, because no one gave it to you. You gave it to yourself. So this is your moment. Not a high, not a peak, but a declaration. A quiet, grounded, irreversible decision to no longer abandon yourself for love that costs too much for belonging, that demands silence for success, that asks you to forget your name. This is where it ends. This is where it begins. This is where you say with your whole being, I choose me. I choose rest over rush. I choose honesty over harmony. I choose boundaries over approval. I choose solitude over fake connection. I choose depth over performance. I choose peace over proof. I choose love not as a performance, but as a presence. And I choose to walk this path fully awake, fully human, fully alive. Because that is what happens when you put yourself above everything else. You come home.
Have you noticed how exhausting it is to keep the world in your grip? You map out your days, your relationships, your future. like a carefully written script, hoping reality will play along. You rehearse conversations in your mind, manage the timing of events, adjust your behavior like a stage actor, all to maintain a certain image or to ensure the story unfolds exactly as you envisioned. And yet life keeps slipping sideways. Outcomes resist your plans. People don't follow the roles you've assigned, and circumstances refuse to bend. Each attempt to tighten your hold only seems to magnify the chaos. The harder you push, the further it drifts. There comes a moment when the strain is no longer bearable. You feel it in your body first, a heaviness in the chest, a tightness in the shoulders, a restlessness in the mind, and underneath it all a quiet truth whispers you are not in control and you never truly were. That whisper can feel like a threat to the ego because control is its fortress. Without it, what keeps the unknown from swallowing you whole? But somewhere deeper beyond the voice of fear, another knowing stirs, that perhaps the freedom you have been chasing does not live in mastery over life, but in surrender to it. Carl Jung saw this paradox again and again. The ego clings to control as if it were a lifeline. Yet it is the very grip that keeps you from touching the deeper currents that could carry you where you need to go. He once said, "A life not fully lived is a disease," and he meant that when you confine yourself within the walls of fear and control, you suffocate your own vitality. You mistake safety for wholeness, certainty for truth, and in doing so, you trade your aliveness for an illusion. Think of the energy you spend trying to manage outcomes. The endless mental rehearsals, the guarded words, the cautious steps, the suppression of feelings that might disturb the image you've crafted. This constant vigilance is not harmless. It drains you. It keeps you in a perpetual state of contraction, unable to breathe fully into the present moment. Jung understood the law of opposites and antiodromia, that the more extreme the force, the more certain its reversal. The more fiercely you cling to a thing, the more likely it is to dissolve through your fingers. The more you try to control others, the more they resist. The more you fight the shadows in yourself, the more powerfully they move in the dark, unseen, but directing your life. It is only when you loosen your grip, not in resignation, but in conscious choice, that a new kind of intelligence begins to move. Jung called it synchronicity, the meeting of inner state and outer event in meaningful coincidence. It is as if the world begins to mirror the subtle changes inside you, arranging itself around your openness instead of your commands. But this can only happen when you stop shouting at life and start listening. Surrender is not passivity. It is the courage to let the false security of control fall away so that you can stand in the truth of uncertainty without turning away. It is the willingness to meet life as it comes without insisting that it conform to your design. And yet surrender asks for something even more difficult than releasing the world. It asks that you release the hold you have on yourself. Why do you cling so tightly to the reins? Jung traced it to fear, not the fleeting fear of danger in the moment, but the deep inherited fears etched into the unconscious. Fear of being seen, fear of failing, fear of pain, fear of not being enough. These fears are not random. They are the residue of old wounds formed in moments when your vulnerability met rejection or harm. And so the ego built walls and called them control, not realizing that the fortress became the prison. Beneath those fears live the shadow parts of you, the traits, desires, and emotions you have been taught to suppress because they did not fit the persona you were rewarded for presenting to the world. The persona is the mask you wear to belong, to be acceptable, to be safe. But everything the mask cannot hold. The anger, the envy, the grief, the longing gets pushed into the shadow. And yet what you banish does not vanish. It waits. It shapes your reactions, your choices, your relationships from beneath the surface. Jung taught that the work is not to eliminate the shadow, but to integrate it, to turn toward the parts of yourself you have feared and denied, and to bring them into dialogue. Imagine sitting across from your own fear, your own jealousy, your own grief, and asking, "What do you need from me? What are you trying to protect?" You may discover that these parts are not your enemies, but guardians who have been using outdated strategies to keep you safe. When you listen, you begin to reclaim the energy bound up in resistance, and that energy becomes available for creativity, for connection, for living. As you integrate, the need for control naturally loosens. You no longer have to keep a constant lid on your emotions because they no longer feel like threats. You no longer have to script every interaction because you are no longer afraid of who you might be without the script. You begin to realize that the self you have been defending so fiercely was never your full self, only a fragment, only the mask. And here is where the miracle begins to unfold. In releasing control, you do not fall into chaos. You fall into a larger order, one you do not have to manage for it to hold you. Life begins to meet you in ways you could not have designed. The right words arrive in the moment you need them. The right person calls without knowing why. The path appears where before there was only a wall. But to step into this way of living, you must be willing to die to the old way, the way of constant management, of mistrust, of bracing against life. This is not an easy death. The ego will fight to keep its throne, convincing you that without control you will lose yourself. But the truth is the opposite. Without control, you will find yourself not the self that needs approval or predictability, but the one that is whole, whether the world bends or breaks. That, self, Jung said, is the organizing center of the psyche, far wiser than the conscious mind. The ego sees in fragments. The self perceives the whole. And when you stop identifying solely with the ego's narrow view, you begin to act from a deeper intelligence, one that does not need to control, because it already belongs to the larger pattern. It starts with one breath, one unclenched hand, one moment where you notice the impulse to tighten and instead choose to soften. And in that moment, life rushes in. You begin to see that this softening is not weakness. It is the quiet strength of aligning yourself with something vast and alive. Control is a rigid posture. Surrender is a living stance. In surrender, you are not collapsing. You are widening. You are allowing the deeper currents of your being to rise, to take their rightful place in guiding you. Jung observed that the moment you stop resisting the contents of your own unconscious, they start to transform. It is as though what you have been pushing away finally breathes, and in that breath it changes shape. The monster in the dark corner becomes a wounded child. The rage you feared would consume you reveals itself as the voice of a part of you that has been silenced too long. Even your deepest shame can become a doorway to compassion when it is met with understanding instead of exile. This is why control is so seductive, because it spares you, at least temporarily, from facing these encounters. The ego says, if I can keep everything in place, I will never have to feel what I have buried. But the cost of that bargain is enormous. You trade the raw, unpredictable aliveness of your inner life for a narrow hallway of safe, familiar reactions. You keep your shadow at bay, but you also keep your own wholeness out of reach. When you allow these disowned parts to come into view, you are practicing what Jung called individuation, the gradual process of becoming whole. Individuation is not about becoming perfect or achieving some final state of serenity. It is about weaving together the fragments of your psyche into a living unity so that you no longer have to pretend to be one-dimensional. It is about recognizing that your light and your darkness are not enemies but partners in your unfolding. In this way, surrender becomes an act of radical honesty. You stop trying to be only what the world finds acceptable. You let yourself be complex, contradictory, unfinished. You make room for the unknown, not just in the world around you, but inside yourself. And as you do, the compulsion to manage every outcome begins to dissolve because you are no longer terrified of what might surface. You might notice that as you loosen your grip internally, your relationships begin to shift as well. When you stop controlling your own image, you stop needing to control others to protect it. You allow people to surprise you, to reveal who they are instead of who you think they should be. And in that space, intimacy grows. It is the intimacy that comes from meeting in truth, not performance. Jung compared the meeting of two souls to the interaction of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Control tries to prevent the reaction. It tries to keep the chemistry predictable. But when you let go, the alchemy begins. You change each other not through manipulation, but through authentic encounter. The same is true with life itself. How many times have you fought against a change only to discover later that it was the doorway to something greater? How many times have you been certain that something was a disaster, only to realize it carried you to an unforeseen opportunity? This is the pattern Jung saw over and over, that the things we resist most fiercely often contain the very medicine we need. Surrendering to that truth does not mean abandoning your dreams or neglecting your responsibilities. It means recognizing that the path toward what you long for may not match the route you had in mind. It means understanding that there is wisdom in the unexpected, that sometimes the detour is the real road. Control imagines safety as the elimination of risk. But real safety comes from trust. Not blind trust in some external force, but trust in your own ability to meet what arises. You begin to understand that you can walk into the unknown and still remain yourself. You can face loss and not be erased by it. You can be hurt and still stay open to love. When you stop trying to manipulate every moment, you begin to act from a different source. Jung called this source the self, not the small I of daily roles, but the deeper organizing principle of your being. The self does not need to dominate because it is already connected to the whole. The ego pushes and pulls. The self moves with precision, as if guided by an invisible thread. And this is perhaps the greatest paradox of letting go. When you stop forcing life to follow your commands, your actions become more effective, not less. You are no longer acting out of fear, scrambling to prevent imagined disasters. You are moving in harmony with a larger pattern, responding to what is actually present. Decisions arise with a clarity that does not require overthinking, because they are rooted in the deeper soil of your own truth. This is not a one-time shift. It is a practice. There will be days when the old reflex to control snaps back, when fear surges and you find yourself trying to tighten the frame again. But each time you notice and soften, each time you pause instead of grasp, you reinforce a new way of being. You begin to see that life is not asking you to dominate it, but to meet it fully, openly, without pretense. And in meeting life this way, you discover something you could never have managed into existence: the quiet miracle of belonging to yourself without conditions. There is a moment, and perhaps you've already felt it, when the burden of control begins to slip from your shoulders, and in its place there is a strange and unfamiliar lightness. It doesn't come with fireworks or grand revelations. It arrives quietly, like the sound of a door you didn't know was locked suddenly clicking open. You breathe, and for the first time in a long while, the breath feels complete. In that lightness, you start to notice the world differently. The edges of things seem softer. The air feels less like a force you must push against, and more like something that moves with you. Conversations that once felt like strategic negotiations become genuine exchanges. You begin to listen not just to others, but to the subtle movement inside yourself. Impulses, intuitions, the faint stirring of desires you had long silenced. This is where Jung's idea of synchronicity becomes more than a concept. You begin to see it at work, the curious way events line up, the unexpected meeting that carries a message you needed to hear. The book that falls into your lap just when the question it answers has been circling your mind. These are not accidents. They are reflections, outer expressions of the inner alignment you are beginning to cultivate. The controlling ego hates coincidence because it cannot take credit for it. But when you shift your allegiance from control to connection, you see that life has always been speaking to you. You were simply too busy managing its script to hear. And as you listen more closely, you realize that much of what you feared about letting go was never about the outer world. It was about what you might discover inside yourself if the noise quieted. Because when you are no longer consumed with controlling others or managing every contingency, the unconscious has room to speak. Dreams become more vivid. Symbols and images rise unbidden, carrying messages from depths your waking mind cannot reach. Jung saw dreams as the natural language of the unconscious, a direct line to the parts of you that hold wisdom the ego does not possess. By paying attention, by recording them, sitting with them, asking them what they want to show you, you begin to deepen your relationship with the self. In this relationship, you encounter figures that Jung would call archetypes, patterns of human experience that live within all of us: the nurturing mother, the wise old man, the trickster, the inner child. Each arrives with its own gifts and shadows. And here another truth emerges. Surrender is not a straight line into serenity. The unconscious will not simply hand you peace, it will hand you what you need to grow. Sometimes that means meeting the very thing you've spent your life avoiding. But now, without the iron grip of control, you have the space to meet it differently. You no longer have to banish it. You can engage with it as Jung encouraged through active imagination, a conscious dialogue between the waking mind and the figures or feelings that arise from within. You sit with your fear as if it were a person in the room. You ask your anger what it is protecting. You let your sadness speak without interruption. Through this dialogue, the shadow becomes less a threat and more a collaborator in your wholeness. What you once pushed away begins to return, bringing back the vitality it carried. You discover that each shadow holds a key, not to the life you imagined when you were managing every detail, but to the life that fits you in ways you could never have planned. This is where the deeper shift begins. You stop seeing surrender as loss and start seeing it as integration. You are not giving up control because you are weak. You are releasing control because you no longer need to split yourself apart to survive. And with this, something profound begins to happen in the outer world. Relationships you thought were stagnant start to breathe. Opportunities you never considered become visible. Conflicts that seemed unresolvable soften sometimes without a single direct intervention from you. This is not magic in the sense of bending reality to your will. It is magic in the sense of discovering that when you are whole, reality meets you in kind. The old habit of control will still whisper to you, especially in moments of uncertainty or pain. It will promise safety if you just tighten your grip. But now you know the truth. Safety that comes from contraction is not safety at all. It is a postponement of life. And so in those moments, you choose differently. You pause. You breathe. You listen inward before you act outward. Sometimes that listening will lead you to take bold action. Sometimes it will lead you to wait. The difference is that your movement now comes from a place of inner coherence, not fear. This is the paradox Jung understood so well. When you surrender, you do not disappear. You arrive. You step into your life fully, not as the manager of a fragile script, but as the living author of a story that is unfolding in collaboration with something far greater than your plans. There is a certain rawness that comes with this way of living. Without the armor of control, you feel more the sting of disappointment, the sharp edge of uncertainty, the vulnerability of showing yourself without guarantees. But you also feel more of the beauty, the subtle graces that were invisible when your gaze was fixed on managing outcomes. The warmth in a stranger's smile, the sudden clarity of a sunrise after days of gray, the quiet sense that you are exactly where you need to be even if you do not know why. Jung saw this as the awakening of the inner compass, the self guiding you not through rigid rules, but through resonance. When something is right for you, it carries a certain quality of energy, an inner yes that does not need justification. And when something is wrong, even if it looks perfect on the outside, you feel the dissonance immediately. This kind of knowing does not thrive in a life run by control. It requires the open space that surrender provides. As you keep walking this path, the relationship between your inner and outer worlds begins to change. You see that projection, the unconscious habit of attributing your own disowned qualities to others, has shaped much of your experience. When you feared your own anger, you saw hostility in everyone else. When you rejected your own need for rest, you labeled others as lazy. Projection is the shadow's way of entering your life through the back door, and control is often the method you use to keep those projected qualities at bay. But now, with a growing willingness to meet your shadow directly, you start reclaiming those projections. You see that what you judged in others was often what you could not accept in yourself. And as you integrate those parts, the outer world becomes less of a battlefield. People stop triggering you in the same way because you are no longer at war with the reflection they offer. This shift in perception is one of the quiet miracles of individuation. You realize that so much of what you were trying to control in others was actually an attempt to manage your own unacknowledged feelings. The release of control, then, is not a gamble. It is the natural outcome of taking responsibility for your own inner life. And with that responsibility comes freedom. You can allow others to be as they are without needing them to conform to your comfort zone. You can let relationships evolve or even end without clinging to them as proof of your worth. This is not detachment in the cold sense of indifference, but a deeper intimacy born of respect for your path and for theirs. Jung compared the psyche to a living organism, one that seeks wholeness the way a plant seeks light. The ego's attempt to control is like trying to force a plant to grow in the shape you imagine, bending its stem, pruning its leaves to match an ideal. You might create something orderly, but you might also damage its vitality. When you instead focus on the conditions, the soil, the light, the water, and allow the plant's own intelligence to direct its growth, you create the space for it to flourish. The same is true for your life. You cannot control the exact form it will take, but you can tend to the conditions: honest self-reflection, compassionate acceptance of your shadow, openness to the messages of your dreams, the courage to act from your deepest truth. These are not external manipulations, they are internal alignments. And from them, life grows in ways you could never have scripted. This growth is rarely linear. You will have days of clarity followed by days when the fog returns, when the urge to grasp at control rises again. The difference now is that you can see the pattern. You can feel the contraction when it happens, and you can choose not to mistake it for strength. You can soften again, trusting that even in the fog, the self is still guiding you. Over time, this trust deepens into something like reverence, not for some distant deity, but for the intricate, mysterious intelligence that moves through you and the world. You realize that the same force that turns seeds into forests, tides into oceans, seasons into cycles, is also shaping the unfolding of your life. And in that realization, control becomes unnecessary, not because nothing matters, but because everything is held in a larger order than you can orchestrate. From this place, you begin to live less as a strategist and more as a participant. You still make plans, you still act with intention, but you are no longer bound by the fear that if you do not hold the reins tightly enough, everything will collapse. You understand now that some of the most important turns in your life came not from your control, but from its absence. This is the quiet revolution. Jung invites you into a way of living that is not about defeating the unknown, but befriending it. A way of meeting each moment without the weight of needing to dominate it. A way of allowing yourself to be shaped by what you encounter, trusting that the shaping is part of your becoming. At first, this trust feels fragile, like a new sprout you're afraid to touch in case it breaks. You find yourself testing it, watching to see if life will really hold you without the constant intervention of control. And life, in its own unpredictable way, responds not always by giving you what you want, but by giving you what reveals your strength. You begin to understand that surrender is not about being spared from difficulty, it is about discovering who you are inside it. Jung once said, "I am not what has happened to me, I am what I choose to become." That choice, when freed from the compulsions of control, becomes vast. You are no longer limited to the narrow identity you have been defending. You can explore, experiment, fail, begin again, all without the crushing need for each outcome to prove your worth. The self that emerges in this space is not the brittle persona you once showed the world, but the living, breathing wholeness of your being. With this wholeness comes a new relationship to time. Control lives in the future in constant negotiation with what might happen. It anxiously pulls you out of the present to prepare for a moment that may never come. But surrender draws you back here into the immediacy of what is. You begin to inhabit your moments more fully, not as waiting rooms for some future event, but as complete experiences in themselves. Even the mundane begins to carry a certain radiance, the texture of sunlight on a table, the rhythm of your breath, the way silence can feel alive when you stop trying to fill it. And when the future does arrive, it often looks different from what you imagined. But you notice that you are different too, more flexible, more open, more able to adapt without losing your center. This adaptability is not born of indifference, but of connection. You are rooted now in something deeper than circumstances, something that does not rise and fall with every shift in the wind. This rootedness changes the way you face loss. Where once you might have clung desperately to keep something from leaving you, now understand that endings are not always failures. Sometimes they are the necessary clearing that makes space for what is next. You grieve, yes, but you no longer make grief an enemy to be defeated by control. You allow it to move through you, trusting that it too is part of your becoming. And in the same way you meet joy without trying to possess it. You do not cage it with expectations or freeze it in place through fear of its passing. You let it breathe. You let it go when it goes, knowing it will return in its own season. This is the rhythm of a life lived in dialogue with itself rather than in dictatorship. The more you live this way, the more you notice the subtle choreography between your inner shifts and the events of your outer life. You find yourself in conversations that mirror the very insight you were wrestling with. You cross paths with someone whose story illuminates a question you had not spoken aloud. These synchronicities no longer feel like rare miracles, but like the natural language of a connected existence. And you realize something else, that by releasing control, you are not just changing your own life. You are changing the field you share with others. Your openness invites openness. Your willingness to be real creates a space where others can put down their own masks. This is how transformation ripples outward, not through force, but through presence. It is here that community takes on a new meaning. You see that individuation, the journey toward becoming your true self, is deeply personal, but it is not solitary. We awaken in one another's reflections. We grow in the friction and the grace of relationship. When you share your own moments of surrender, your own encounters with the shadow, you become part of a collective alchemy. Your story may be the mirror in which someone else first recognizes themselves. And perhaps that is one of the quietest but most profound miracles of letting go. The realization that your authenticity is not just a gift to yourself, but to everyone you meet. You no longer have to control how they receive it. You trust that the truth of who you are will find its way to where it needs to go. This is not the end of the work, but it is a turning point. The compulsion to control will visit you again as old patterns do. But now, you have touched a different way of being. You have felt the current that moves beneath your strategies, and you know you can return to it. This knowledge is a kind of homecoming, not to a place, but to yourself. And so you find yourself walking through life differently, not with the tight, forward-leaning posture of someone bracing against what's ahead, but with a grounded presence that meets each step as it lands. You are still moving toward your dreams, still shaping your life with intention, but you are no longer fighting reality to make it match the image in your mind. There is a subtle but profound shift from insisting to listening, from demanding to collaborating. In this listening, you begin to sense layers of yourself you had never truly inhabited. There is the surface self, the one who speaks, acts, and navigates the world. But there are also the quieter voices within the anima, or animus, the inner counterpart to your conscious identity, carrying the qualities you have not yet integrated. Jung described this figure as the bridge between the ego and the deeper self, often appearing in dreams or fantasies as a person who captivates you, provokes you, or unsettles you in ways you cannot explain. When you meet this inner figure, whether in a dream's embrace or in the way someone in waking life stirs something unnameable in you, you are encountering a mirror of your own unclaimed wholeness. In the past, the impulse might have been to control that feeling, to contain it, to make it safe. But now you are learning to be curious, to ask, what part of me is being called into awareness right now? What am I being asked to see? This curiosity changes the way you relate not just to yourself, but to everything. You begin to sense that every encounter, every challenge, every joy and loss is part of a larger dialogue between your conscious life and the vast unfolding intelligence of the unconscious. The ego wants to turn this into a puzzle to be solved, but the self invites you to experience it as a mystery to be lived. And in living it, you discover an entirely different kind of power. Not the brittle power of control, but the steady power of alignment. The more you listen inward, the more your actions outward carry a certain inevitability, as though they were the natural next step rather than the result of endless calculation. This is the kind of action that feels like truth in motion. It requires effort, but the effort is not strained. Of course, life will still bring storms. There will still be moments when the ground drops out beneath you, when the map you thought you were following disintegrates. But even here, you will notice a difference. You will feel the fear, the grief, the anger, but you will also feel the ground of your own being beneath it all. You are no longer just the one weathering the storm. You are also the space in which the storm is happening. And storms pass. They always do. Jung knew that the process of individuation, of becoming who you truly are, was not a straight ascent into light. It is a spiral moving again and again between descent and return. You descend into the shadow, into the unlit places, not to be swallowed by them, but to retrieve what they have been guarding. Each return brings you back into the world more whole, more real, more capable of meeting life without needing to bend it to your will. And something remarkable happens as this spiral continues. You stop asking, "How do I control my life?" and start asking, "How do I participate fully in it?" The shift seems small, but it changes everything. Control is about narrowing possibilities to fit your plans. Participation is about opening yourself to possibilities you could not have conceived. It is here that you begin to see the deeper meaning of Jung's words. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This becoming is not a performance for the world, nor is it a fixed destination. It is a continual unfolding, a willingness to meet each new facet of yourself with the same openness you bring to the turning seasons. And so you live in dialogue with your dreams, with your relationships, with the moments of synchronicity that remind you you are woven into something vast. You still shape your life, but you do so the way a gardener shapes a garden, by tending to what is here, by nurturing the conditions for growth, and then stepping back to let life's own intelligence take over. You may not know exactly what will bloom next, but you trust that when it does, you will be ready to meet it.